Are you ready to get started, Becca? Is that cool?
Sure.
Sure. Why not? All right. Welcome everybody. I'm so happy to welcome Bekah Hawrot Weigel. Is that right? Is that
Yep,
good
you
enough?
did a good job.
Yes. All right. Success. To speak to our Tech Talks meetup here. This is sponsored by the Collab Lab. So I'm going to say just a word or two about the Collab Lab, then I'm going to introduce Becca, and then I'm going to hand it over to her. The Collab Lab, who sponsors this meetup, we are a small US-based nonprofit, and we provide collaborative project practice for early career developers. So what that means is that we get teams together, they work on projects under with guidance from mentors who are professionals in the field. It's all free to participate. It's all the mentors are volunteers. And we don't focus on teaching coding. We focus on teaching the collaboration skills that are important to being on a professional software team. So yeah, we try to make it as real world as possible and just give you that experience of pair programming and writing great PR descriptions, merging code reviewing, all those kinds of activities that professional developers do. Yeah, we just kicked off a cohort just a couple weeks ago, and 5 teams, North America. We have a Latin America team running in Spanish. We have a team in Europe and Africa who are participating as well. Yeah, it's really great. So it's not only for US-based people. So yeah, so Deborah, we yeah, like I said, we have a Europe and Africa team this time, and we'll be doing that, trying to even expand over there as well. So we have mentors who are based in Europe and Africa who help out with that group. So yeah, so that's a little bit about Collab Lab. I don't know Becca super well, other than sort of online. We actually met sort of, is this even face-to-face? Maybe this is what counts for face-to-face.
Yes, we're friends now.
Yeah, right. But just, kind of stalking her a little bit online and seeing what, what she's been up to. I've been really impressed with her journey into tech. Becca is a survivor of trauma, as she will probably be talking about, and has an amazing blog that she writes called Beauty in Scar about that. She is a developer and is also the founder of Virtual Coffee, which I think a few of you are participants in. So I'm super excited just to kind of hear more about your journey, Becca. Everything I know about you is that you are one of the strongest people around, and not just because you can squat twice your body weight.
Almost. I didn't hit twice this year, but I was pretty close.
Okay, all right, cool. So yeah, so I'll turn it over to you, and yeah, I don't know if you want to be able to, like, I'll watch the chat, if there are questions, that kind of thing. And
I got it open too, so.
Okay, cool. All right.
And I am happy to answer questions at any point. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of Collab Lab, and I spent some time talking to Stacy earlier. I guess it's not this year now, last year, just about, all of the issues in tech and with juniors and career changers. So you hold a very special place in my heart because I think you're doing great work. So I'm very happy to be here. So I'm going to try and watch time, but feel free to wave me down if I'm getting out of control here. So thanks for having me. I am going to tell you about my journey into tech. And, it starts like most other people's journey into tech when I was in labor with my 4th child. But before we go there, I will give you a little bit of background about myself. I'm a career changer. So I have a master's in English, and I taught college English part-time for 10 years. And I never had any intentions of changing my career. I didn't love it, but I also didn't hate it. And I'm very happy to be in tech now because I found something that I do love. And I think I found it at the right moment. So I am a mom of 4. And so my journey into tech does start with trauma. And so when I was delivering my fourth child, 2 of my organs ruptured into each other. And I knew that there was something like very, very wrong because I had had 3 kids and it was very painful before, but this was much, much worse. And the doctors and the nurses kept saying like, no, you're fine. Sometimes this is just weird when you have your 4th kid, like these strange symptoms, it's nothing, right? And so they discharged me. I'm going to try not to cry. And sent me home and said, you're fine. And I got home and I thought, I'm not fine. There's something seriously wrong. I was having pretty severe symptoms and they just kept brushing them off. And so I went back in a couple of days later. I got discharged on a weekend and I went in to see my OBGYN so she can say like, okay, these are the next steps because you're having these problems. And what she said was, you're not my problem. Sorry, I normally can tell the story without crying. And in that moment, that was the most lost I had ever felt. I was in the most vulnerable situation of my entire life. I didn't know what was wrong. And I was going home to 4 kids. And that was it. She just sent me to another doctor who said, sometimes these things happen to moms who have had 4 kids. And so finally, about 3 weeks later, I got to see another OBGYN. My mom had a high school classmate whose phone number she had, and she texted her. And she saw me and said, no, you have a hole in between 2 of your organs and they are connected to each other now. Your 2 organs are joined together and you need to have surgery. And so she stayed late on a Friday. She contacted a doctor in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour where I'm from. And on a weekend, made sure that I got an appointment very soon. A couple of weeks later, I was able to have surgery to repair the holes in my organs. It was a surgery that rarely happens in the United States. So nobody on the eastern side of the United States had any experience doing the surgery before. My doctors were fantastic and very knowledgeable. And so I was very comfortable with them. They were very communicative and empathetic, right? Like they weren't telling me I was a problem. They were saying, we're going to help you and you're going to get better. But also we don't know what to expect because we've never done this before. So I woke up in the hospital and I was just in like very, very intense pain. I had to do an emergency hysterectomy and they had to cut out part of my bladder and restructure it. And this is all part of my developer story. I promise, like it all informs the rest of it. But so what happened after that was I needed 2 blood transfusions. My heart wasn't beating the way that it should be. So that helped a little bit, but I was still in a lot of pain and they didn't cap my morphine pump properly. And so I kept pumping the morphine because I was in a lot of pain and then I overdosed on morphine. And so then, luckily my husband noticed and he said, she's not really breathing that much. Is there something wrong? And so they came in and they were like, oh yes, she's has too much morphine. We're going to have to give her Narcan. Well, Narcan undoes the effects of the morphine. And so after having an organ removed and another cut open and stitched back up and being segmented halfway through my body, I could feel everything that was happening, that had happened. during that surgery after the Narcan. And I just remember like, there's just like very odd thing that happens in that moment where time becomes like both super fast and like very slow, and like also, is it even a thing? Like, I just remember staring at the clock and thinking, you know, when is this going to be over? She said she was going to be here in 15 minutes. And then I was like, when was that 15 minutes? So it was like very weird experience of not understanding the world around me, and the things that we normally understand as human beings. And so because of all of this, I went home a week later, and I had to have a babysitter for me and my kids at all times, because I couldn't lift anything. I couldn't get off a couch. I had this like roll move, like I would roll on my knees to the floor and then like scoot up. But what happened after that was I was diagnosed with depression, and I had my first panic attack of my entire life. And I just kept thinking over and over that I wasn't going to be able to breathe anymore because of that moment when I overdosed. I kept thinking, I was timing my breaths. I was looking it up online and thinking like, oh, I'm dying. Like I'm not breathing anymore. It's happening now. Wasn't the case. It was a panic attack. And, you know, my husband had been through panic attacks before. And so, you know, the next day I shared the experience with him, and he was able to say, you know, this is what that was. And my mom is a therapist, and this was, I think, Thanksgiving weekend in the US. And she was like, you know, let's get you into therapy, get you on some medication, and we'll deal with this one thing at a time, right? And so that's what I did. And so therapy was very, very important for me. I went in there thinking like, oh, I don't need it. Like I went through trauma. You just have to process it, right? And then the first time I was there and my therapist was asking me these questions, I was like, oh yes, I need to be here. Like this is important for me because she's asking me questions that I don't know to ask myself. And, you know, that's so much of what life is. Like you don't know what you don't know until you know it, right? And so here's somebody in front of me who can help me to know those things. And so I think for me, what became really difficult is I worked through the entire experience. I was teaching online part-time, and the email that I got from, I think my boss was something like, hey, you know, we heard you had some problems. Can you still keep teaching? And I was like, yes. So literally taught from my hospital bed, you know. I just didn't know. I was part-time. I didn't know what my rights were. I didn't know if I would still get paid, and we needed the money. And so I continued to do it. But also, you know, it was a pretty pivotal moment for me in terms of, you know, understanding the environment that I wanted to be in and be supported by. And then, you know, after all of this happened and I continued to work through this, my identity kind of like very much became tied to the trauma. And so I was like reliving these moments over and over in my head. Like the moment where the doctor told me I wasn't her problem would play in my head thousands of times a day. And I didn't know it at the time. I thought it was normal. I was like, yeah, this is just how people process trauma. And my therapist, like probably 8 months into therapy, was like, that's called PTSD. That's not supposed to happen. We need to work on that. And I was like, oh, okay. And you know, in some sense, like naming something becomes a huge relief, right? Like when I didn't know what was wrong with me, it was like this terrible unknown, but then learning what it was became like, okay, this is something that I could look up and I can figure out there's got to be a solution somewhere. And so I was still stuck so much in that trauma. I still had depression and anxiety and PTSD, but I was like working on it. And my husband is a developer, and he kept saying like, you need to learn how to code. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like I've got 4 kids and I'm a disaster, and you want me to learn how to code? Like, what is that even? But then he kept saying it like over and over. I'm like, fine, I will try free code camp. And then you can stop telling me about it. And then this very amazing thing happened, which was when I was coding, those memories that played in my head thousands of times, they stopped while I was coding. And so coding became like very, very therapeutic for me. It became something that I enjoyed doing because it was a break. It was like rest. I could finally breathe in those moments. And then I just stuck with it. And then I had a Twitter account, maybe, and I was like, what is Twitter? And what do you do with it? And I tried to tell jokes, but I'm like not really funny. So I just laughed at them and like maybe my dad. Um, and then I found a group of moms who were working on coding stuff, and it became like an amazingly supportive group for me. And so here, what a contrast it was coming from academia where they're like, can you still work? And then people just like sharing the hardships that they went through and how difficult it was. And, listening to other mom stories who were leaving their careers and they were career changers. And I was like, well, I think I could do that. And so my boss emailed me. It's like, I've got a couple of classes for you next semester. And I was like, no, thank you. I'm ready for something else. And so then it became a commitment. I had to do it because I quit my job that I had just been in for the past 8 years. And I'm like, okay, all right, I can do this. And so that support with the moms was so important, but also their vulnerability and sharing what they went through, like hearing what they went through in their workplaces, hearing people be threatened, or moms like, oh no, you can't leave to go pick up your kid. If you do, you'll be fired. I was like, what is that? That's not okay. And I'm not okay with that. And generally in life, I am a person that says, okay, there's an injustice. I'm going to go fight that injustice. And, for a long time, I just felt really let down and like I was being held down. And I finally was starting to regain some of that passion, some of that I'm ready to fight for something else now. And we'll start there. If nobody wants to give moms a job, then I'll figure out ways to give moms a job. Somebody can do it. Why not me? And this idea of the lack of flexibility for moms, or like, oh, you have a baby and you need to pump at lunch, go do it in the janitor's closet, or hey, you can use my personal bathroom. Like, not okay, right? Like, I am not okay with that stuff. And that kind of propelled me forward. Like, the love of the community, it was equal to the love of the code. And so knowing that, I have these women who have my back, that was super important for me. And so then I think at that point I started blogging too. My it's Bekah HW at github.io. Every time I look at it, I'm like, I need to redo my site. But so I started this blog, and I was like, I really should design this blog myself. And I'm not a designer. And I wasn't then either. It's had some updates, but I dove into coding something that I had no business coding, which has kind of been my thing for the entire time I've been coding. And I got it up, and there were words on the screen, right? And you could see all of the blog posts. I'm like, all right, I've done this. I can do this. This is cool. And so mostly for me, my blog has just been about my journey. And that's important for me because I think that there are so many people out there, and there have been so many people who have reached out to me and said, like, I really felt like I couldn't do it. And then I read your post, and then I was like, oh, she went through the same thing. And this was a really important moment in my life and in my coding career. So one of the big takeaways I think that you always should have is ask questions all the time. because somebody can answer them and then you'll learn something. And so I had kind of like leveled out at Free Code Camp. It wasn't clicking with me. And then I started Flatirons pre-boot camp prep. And the co-founder at the time, Avi Flombaum, was very supportive of me. And that was like hugely important, to feel like I've got a cheerleader here and this person thinks I am important. And at the time I couldn't afford to go to Flatiron school. And so like I had asked, like what can I do? Like, how can I make it there? And he messaged me and was like, look, there's some scholarships coming up. You might be able to get one of them. So check it out. And so I got one of their full scholarships, which doesn't happen that often. And I was like, all right, wow, this really is a thing, right? Like I'm going to do this. And then it was, I'm coding on a Chromebook, like kind of can't learn to code on a Chromebook. And so I posted something on Twitter about like, hey, are there any resources for someone learning to code who can't afford to buy a computer, or does anyone have recommendations? And I got a DM and somebody was like, send me your address. I'll have one on Monday. And that's how I got my computer. And it's through the generosity of other people that I was able to complete that coursework. And one of the greatest things that happened to me when I was at Flatiron School was they assign you a educational coach at the beginning. And so my educational coach was Katie McKenna. And one of the first things she said to me was, I'm just like crying through this whole thing. This is not usual. She said, Bekah, I've been through trauma. Would you mind if I share with you a little bit? And she wrote a book called How to Get Run Over by a Truck. And it is amazing. And she's so funny. She was literally run over by a semi-truck, right? And so she's telling me her story. Okay. And so I had a trauma. I went through childbirth. She's telling me her story and she's saying the exact words that have played in my head over and over. And so what I realized in that moment was I was not alone in my trauma. There were other people and we had experienced the same things very, very differently, right? Like there are overlapping things. And I have listened to, I don't know how many trauma memoirs at this point, but you hear the words that go through your head and you realize like community is so important. And I listened to this author, I can't think of what his name is right now, but he was talking about addiction too. And what he said about that was addiction happens in isolation. It happens in desperation. And I felt that very, very deeply. Not that I had gone through that, but I know that like deep darkness that happens when you are isolated, when you feel alone, when you feel like there is nobody that can possibly understand you. When you don't have community, when you don't have somebody that loves you or you feel like you don't, right? And that leads us to places that are not, they're not good, right? Those are very problematic places to be. And so when Katie shared her story with me, I learned so much about vulnerability because I was never a person that would talk about my feelings. I would never, ever cry in front of a group of people like this. I would not tell you that I went through depression or anxiety. That was not my thing. But one of the things that she said to me was, I was talking to her about like sharing my story. I wrote a memoir and I'm like, I don't know why I'm writing this, Katie. I'm just writing it down. And she was like, we don't share our stories for ourselves. We share our stories to invite other people to share their stories with us. And that was, a couple years ago now. And like, I remember that very, very much. And I can, like feel the depth with what she said that. And it's true because, one of the things is, and I have since spoken to the hospital administration where my trauma occurred and they've made changes, but I talked to them about person-centered care and I carry that with me into tech as well, because I think that there's this tendency to look at we have products and we have users and we have employees and we have developers. but everyone is a person first. And unless you look deeply into that humanity and you look at the person, I don't think that you are going to succeed in the way that you should. And I don't know, like, you know, I'm not a business person, so I don't know, you know, maybe is there a trade-off for treating other people with empathy? Like, I don't know. I think that, you know, if we are always looking at the other person and realizing that, you know, we are a community and let's help each other and let's do this together, that you make so much more progress that way. And so this is kind of how I have carried this with me. And so let's see here. Trying not to get off track. Yeah, so like this idea of this sense of community and belonging is so important. It's that support that gets you through. It's that support that allows you to grow and to learn and to become better at the things that you're doing. Because when someone invests time in you and sees you as a person, you want to, you know, do a better job, or it's easier. When you have so much stress and pressure on you, it becomes very, very difficult to improve what you're doing because you're so overwhelmed by that. And that's not, I don't know, I knew very early on that was not the kind of place that I wanted to work at. You know, I had fellow classmates who are applying at all of these big places. And I think that's great if that's for you. But for me, it was about the people, it was about the community, and it was about the connection. And so one of the ways that I realized this, I went to a conference called Revolution Conf in Virginia Beach, and I felt like very new and terrified because I heard of how awful women are treated at conferences. And I was like, somebody is going to be so mean to me, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And that's not what I got. I was very lucky at that conference. So one of my first experiences, I walked into this group and I was like kind of standing on the outside. I'm an introvert. I get super nervous at these things and I'm afraid and terrified to talk to people. And my husband was there too. And I just like kind of like stood behind him, like maybe he'll notice I'm here and then I'll just like sneak in. But one of the men who was there was Kyle Shevlin, and I don't know if you know him, but he was like, hey, like, let's make room, Pac-Man method. And I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? And the idea is that when you have a group of people, you always make the Pac-Man mouth. So it's like a kind of like, I'm drawing it in the air for you. But the idea is, okay, so like this, okay, if there's a group around here, you want to always have room for somebody else to come into the group. And so it's this idea of like making sure that everyone feels welcome, and you just keep expanding your circle to allow for people to come in and to allow for people to share. And so you're building like these mini communities. But what that did was it made me feel welcome. And they, you know, asked me about myself, but also didn't make me feel bad ever once for being new and not knowing a lot of things. You know, they asked me questions about me, the person. It wasn't like, hey, what's your tech stack? Oh, nothing. Like, good luck with that, right? It was like, oh, hey, you know, talk to me about yourself. And, you know, having that experience of realizing like, okay, this is what makes people feel welcome, you know, knowing who that person is, just became more of an inspiration to me. And then, you know, when I finished Flatiron School, I had this major, I am not ready to apply for a job thing going on. You know, like I've got community. I applied for a community type role. So it was like tech adjacent. I'm like, okay, that'll be good for me because like I probably won't ever code because I'm not good enough to code or, you know, whatever. And it got down between me and two other people or one other person, and I didn't get the job. And that is, I think, the only job I've not gotten, but also it's the job that I am very happy that I didn't get, right? Because I didn't have confidence in myself, and that's why I applied for that job. And so my husband said, nobody feels ready to apply for a job. Just put it out there on Twitter and see what you get. Like, I don't think I sent any applications. And then there was this overwhelming response. Now, I will say that overwhelming response was because I tweeted consistently during my journey. I talked about all of the things that were difficult for me. And I blogged throughout the time. And during that time, I remember being in Flatiron and getting a message from Code Newbie, and they were like, "Hey, do you want to be on our podcast?" And I was like me? Like, you want me on your podcast? What? Why? But that it was the experience of being able to share my story, to welcome other people into the community. That was the important part. And that was how I had those connections on Twitter that led to my job. And so, like, there were 3 things that I was looking for, I think. I wanted remote, I wanted flexible, no, 4 things, part-time, and I wanted it to be meaningful work. Okay. And so one of the responses I got was working with the guy that I work with now, Dan, and it hit 3 out of 4 of those things. Okay, so it was everything except meaningful work, and it was interesting work. So I won't say that, but I wanted something that like added to the community. And I told my career coach at the time at Flatiron, and she was like, "You don't have to have all of those things in a job, right? Like you can do something meaningful outside of your job." I was like, "Okay, well, all right, well, we'll try that out." Right. And so then entering my first job, it was a real challenge because you're kind of in toddlerhood as a coder at that point. So you're like still super awkward, and like you're trying to form words and you're trying to walk, but you're not that good at it. But also you're an adult, so you realize you're not that good at it. And as a career changer, I had spent 10 years teaching college English. I was used to teaching people and I was used to knowing all of the answers, right? And so now I was in a field where I didn't know all of the answers. I didn't even know how to ask a lot of the questions. And I would ask my husband, because he was is a developer. I say, can you listen to how I worded this email? Because I'm not sure if this is right. and I was having him like proof here what I was writing to make sure that I was writing it in the right way. And so I got very, very caught up in this like appearance of what I should be doing. Like this is what a developer should look like. This is how a developer should talk. And I think that really caused me not to grow in the way that I could have grown those first couple of months, because I was so afraid. I was like afraid that I was going to be fired every single meeting that we had. And that has nothing to do with Dan, because he was always very supportive and like, "You're doing a really good job," and like helping me walk through things. But it was just this lack of confidence on my side in not realizing that you grow when you ask questions, right? And so, yes, there is something to be said for like digging deep when I didn't bill for this time, but I spent 17 hours working on this one thing. Yeah. And so I like deep dove, but also like I went from working in a code base that was my own code base that had like 5 files, right? And then I'm in this ginormous code base, and I'm like, okay, so I've got to like look through all the pieces. So you're dealing with this. Not only do you have a coding issue that you're solving, but you're diving into, like a set of encyclopedias and trying to figure out what word you're looking for when you don't know what word it is, So I think I asked him, maybe it was probably on a weekend, and then I asked him on a Monday, and I think he had the answer in like 5 minutes. And I was like, "Oh, okay." There was certainly value in that deep dive because I learned a lot about the code base, and I learned a lot about how things worked together. But I also learned it's okay to ask questions, and figuring out your own process as you work through it is super important. So know when you're at the point where like, okay, I've gone in circles 7 times. I should have asked 5 times ago or whatever. Once you hit that first or second circle, it's time to ask for help. Or, sometimes now I know that it's going to be a quick answer for him. And so it's balancing that idea. Like, yes, will I learn something if I do it myself? I certainly will. But if he explains it to me, I might learn it faster. So there's always this negotiation that should be going on about like, when do you ask questions? But also like, don't be afraid to ask questions or to say like, hey, can you walk me through this? Because I'm not sure what's going on here. And, sometimes when you're diving into new large code bases, what you don't realize is like some of that code was written a long time ago. So there might be things that you don't understand because you've learned newer ways of doing things, but it's always good to be able to learn from someone else. And it also gives them the opportunity to teach you. And I think through teaching, everybody learns as well. So it's a learning experience for everyone. So I am going to, let's see where I'm at. I'm done with that page and halfway through that page. One of the things that I think was really challenging also in that stage was when, for most programs, if you're learning yourself, even if you're going to a university or if you've gone to a boot camp, some of the major things, I want to write a blog post on this so bad when I have time, is there are things that you don't learn that are super valuable. And that's things like exactly what Collab Lab is doing, right? Like collaborating, learning to talk through your code. So most of the time you're not talking through your code. So then when somebody says, like, if you're in an interview, walk me through this, well, I'm not really sure how to walk through this, or you stumble over it. So mastering that skill of learning how to talk through it is really important. So pairing with people at Virtual Coffee, we had a pairing challenge a couple of months ago, and it was really awesome to see people walking through code together and learning together. Other things, like I maybe submitted 2 pull requests before I started my first job. I don't know if I ever had a branch. So reading issues, writing issues, these are all skills that I didn't know and that I really wish I did because they are super practical. And I think there's this tendency with education. I have like this, since my background is in education, this idea of what an educational philosophy should be. But there's this idea of academic learning versus practical learning. And I think sometimes we focus on the academic learning, but when somebody wants you to come into a job, they want you to get started and get coding, and they are relying heavily on that practical learning. So I almost think that prioritizing that rather than the academic deep diving into the topics, that comes as you learn more. But really getting the understanding of the process and how that works is super important. And it took me a while to get that down. And like, even now, I can't create a branch without looking at it. I just forget all the time how to create branches. And so I have it written in all of the front covers of my notebooks, how to do it, just so it's a quick reference. So and also, everybody is always looking something up. If you're new, you're looking it up. If you've been here 15 years, you're looking it up, right? There is no shame in learning. There's no shame in not having everything memorized. That is not how my brain works. And so, we finally got to this place, Dan and I, where like we had hit the stride of communication because it was, tough in the beginning. And then COVID hit. And then I remember my kids' school shut down and they were like, come get their books. And I was on the phone with my dad at the time. And I was like, Dad, I think that, I wouldn't be surprised if I lost my job because, I am the newest person there and I'm doing things that aren't absolutely necessary. And I got a Slack message from Dan and I was like, hey, hit me up when you get back. I got back and he was like, hey, we don't have work anymore. He said it in a much nicer way than that, but that's how I remember it. So I'll go with that. And I'm like, okay, so now I don't have a job. I've got 4 kids at home and I'm supposed to school them while I apply for jobs and interview for the first time ever, because I never really had an interview the first time around. Like, sweet, this is awesome. And so what I did was I cried and then I cried some more. And then I put out a Twitter message, and this is very much how life was. I was in an interview and my 6-year-old walked behind my desk into my bathroom, with the door open, peed in the middle of my interview, flushed the toilet, and then walked out. And I was like, well, that's a thing. And the interviewer was super nice about it. And she was like, oh, it's COVID. We understand. And, for me, that was great. But also, this is kind of life for me all the time. I work a flexible schedule. Sometimes my kids are home. Sometimes I have a babysitter with them. Sometimes I don't. And I do what is best for my family and what's best for me. And so this is life. It's extra heightened because of COVID. But so I was going to these interviews, and what I was finding was like time after time I was getting to whatever stage of the interview, and it was like, oh, we lost our funding because of COVID. Oh, we're frozen because of COVID. I literally read 2 books in 2 weeks for one interview because that was what was asked of me. And then I found out that there wasn't a job available. It was still a good experience because I got that interview experience and it was fun. And at that point, I was like, I don't even care what I say in these interviews. I'm not going to freak out because I'm over this. So I was like very much myself. And I don't know, being unapologetically me is kind of something that I've embraced over this. So if you don't want me because I'm a mom, I don't want you. If you don't want me because I need a flexible schedule, then I don't want you. If you are going to have a problem with the way that I do things that is because of me personally, no thanks. And so I learned that kind of the hard way because I interviewed for this job with this startup and they're like, we're an all women engineering team and it's great. And I'm like, this is awesome. I did the 4-hour take home test and I did it in the evening, which is when my brain dies, and I powered through it. And I found out that I had done better than the senior developers that took the take home test. And so then they said, how much do you want hourly? And I think I said $70 an hour. And she was like, oh, no, we were thinking like 30. And I was like, 30, that's pretty low. Right. And then I thought about it for a while and I was like, okay, well, maybe could you do 50? And she was like, yeah, we can do 50. And I'm like, okay, that's less than what I was making before, but I'll go for it. Okay, wait, before that, let me back up because I need to talk about gut feelings for a second. I've never been a gut feeling person, but she asked me in the interview how I planned on working with my kids at home and schooling them at the same time. Red flag number 1, you're not allowed to ask that question. Number 2, she told me after I said I wanted 70, she was like, I talked to some of my counterparts down here and you are overvaluing yourself. I felt so bad about myself in that moment. I thought, am I overvaluing myself? What am I worth? And so that was really difficult for me because I thought maybe I am only worth that much. She's a mom. It's a team of all women. They've been here for a while. And so she offered me that 50 and I said, okay. I was supposed to have a call with her, I think the next day. And then she emailed me and she was like, actually, I have to rescind that offer because we don't even pay our lead engineer $50 an hour. But if you still want to talk, we can. And at that point, I was like, no, thank you. I am done. I am over this, And that is right around the time that I started virtual coffee because I was going through these and I didn't have this community around me to say, yes, she's right. $30 an hour is what you should take, or she's absolutely wrong. There wasn't a network for me. And I knew that it was important. I was still going to bed every night crying. And I was like, I know this feeling. I know the desperation I'm feeling. I've been here before. And this is when I went through trauma, except this time it's different because the entire world is going through trauma together. And so I know that I am not the only person that needs to have community. And so I posted on Twitter, I said, who wants to get together for some virtual coffee? And I got a couple of people who wanted to do it. I'm like, okay, this is cool. And then we talked about these things together because a lot of us were experiencing the same things. We were quarantined and we were isolated and we were feeling really, really bad. And we talked about those interview experiences because I wasn't the only one having the experience of going through this to find out that the job was frozen or that the offer was rescinded, or I had a friend who got an offer and then they just ghosted her. They're like, here's your offer, and then never talked to her again. Yeah. And we actually, Virtual Coffee has a podcast episode about that coming up because she did the interview with us. And so then like what I found was that I was really finding energy being around people and through this understanding. And not only that, but like I was finding friendships. And I remember reading this thing about people who go through trauma together. There's like, I can't remember what it's called, but there's something like physiologically that happens when you experience trauma with another person that creates this deep attachment to the other people because you're experiencing these things. It creates a situation that cannot happen in other circumstances. And for me, knowing these people, it became that. It's like, the thing about Virtual Coffee is like, we're not a group of people, we're friends, I've been part of Slack groups before where I just kind of like hover and like look at what people are saying, but I never feel like there's a place for me. And I didn't ever want anybody to feel like there wasn't a place for them. I wanted people to feel like they had support. And it's always been a goal of mine to make sure that nobody ever feels the way that I felt when I was sitting in that doctor's office and she said, "You're not my problem." Like everyone here has a place at the table. And some of us have more resources than others. Some of us have privilege. And then it becomes our job to make sure that we can help other people, or that we can elevate their voices, or that we can say like, no, don't take me, take this other person because they have not had the opportunities that I've had. So Virtual Coffee just became this thing that I never ever expected. I thought like, okay, we'll be doing Virtual Coffee for a couple months, right? And then so many people started messaging me, and I'm like, I can't just DM people Zoom links on Slack because it's taken me a half an hour just to do that. So then we signed up for a place where we had registration, and then I like upped my Zoom, and then we went from 1 day to 2 days, and people were offering to help and to build and to grow. And I'm like, okay, this is cool. Like we are all friends. This will be great. We'll do this through the summer, right? Like probably once the fall hits, like it'll be a happy memory, and then I'll have friends. And at that point, I had landed a small contract doing React Native, which I had never done before. But the woman who interviewed me said, "Do you think you can do it?" And I said, "Yes, I think I can do it." And she said, "Okay, then you can do it." And I spoke to her recently, and she said, if I interview someone and I say, "Can you do it?" And they say, "I'm not sure, but I'll try." And then the other person says, "Yes, I can." I will hire the person that says, "Yes, I can," even if the "I'm not sure, I'll try" person has more on their resume. And the point is, like, confidence plays a huge role, but you don't get confidence unless you have support, unless you have good people. I was like very fortunate to be working with Dan because he was always supportive throughout my journey and helping me learn and helping me grow. And I think that was very informative with Virtual Coffee as well, like knowing about what the experiences other people had and how fortunate I was to have somebody who was that supportive. And a very pivotal moment for Virtual Coffee came at Hacktoberfest. And this is when I fully realized, like, okay, Virtual Coffee is we're a thing. Like we're going to keep doing this. Hacktoberfest is the month of October. DigitalOcean and I think Dev now and maybe somebody else, they work together to promote open source contributions. And if you get 4 open source contributions, then you can get a t-shirt and some stickers if you sign up. But it's a big thing. And so we decided to do this open source initiative. We called it the Virtual Coffee Hacktoberfest Initiative, or VCHI. And Dan whipped up like this website really quickly for us to get to put it out there for our members. So our idea was, let's help contributors, maintainers, and have mentors. And so we're just gonna do it all because, you know, why not? Um, and then he also worked on the site to make sure that we had an issue that all of our members can participate in, and that we would have support for them to get in pull requests. So anybody that had never had a pull request could get one in. And so we had like amazing work on the documentation for that. Like Kirk is our documentation guru there, and worked for maintainers with the maintainers. Okay, so a maintainer is somebody who is like running the open source project, and he wait, I got distracted. Okay, so we have this open source project. Oh, I also got diagnosed with ADHD during that time, and I I will tell you about that in a second. So we worked with maintainers who had these open source projects to make it friendly to new coders, because what I found is everybody kept saying like, get into open source to get some experience. And like, I would search for hours through issues. And then there were even things that were labeled good for new people or good for beginners or whatever. They weren't good for beginners. I'm like, I don't even understand half of the words you put in there. Or they were all taken by people who had more experience because they wanted a quick PR, and that wasn't fair. And so we wanted to make sure that we could provide everybody with a supportive environment where they could grow, where they could learn, and where they could ask questions and not be afraid to ask questions. And you know, one of the things, I think it was Sarah who encouraged me to like go for it as a maintainer too, because I had this React Native project, and it kind of like set it off. So I have this postpartum wellness app that I'm working on that I started when I had no business starting a React Native app. And so I had put it off, and then I tried to revive it for this. And I put it off for so long that everything was out of date, all of the dependencies, and I was trying to update and do all these things. Finally, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to wipe it and I'm going to start over. That was my outline. And now I'm going to go for it. And so I did. But what I learned was, surprise, surprise, community matters. I had been trying to build this app by myself, and I didn't make much progress. Having other people contribute and allowing me to grow with them as a mentor, but also as a teacher, and growing together. I remember somebody asked me a question. I'm like, you know, I don't know the answer, but let's look that up together. And that's what coding is about, right? Let's look that up. Let's do it together. And so finding that we had this community and that we were able to provide support for so many people. I can't remember how many first-time pull requests we got, but that was huge for us. You know, the small team, we are all volunteers working on this project. And we had, I think, 6-ish mentors. We had 20 plus people participate and maybe 5 maintainers. But I got to try coding in a different language because I felt comfortable doing that because my friend was the maintainer on that project, right? And so the idea is we're doing it together as friends. And I'm sorry, I'm getting off track. Let's see, what time? Oh, we're running out of time. So can I try and wrap this up?
Oh yeah, okay? For sure. I put a little note in the chat. If people need to roll off at the bottom of the hour, no problem. We'll keep rolling. I mean, this is great, and so yeah, we'll run past, and we'll post the recording later so people can catch up with the rest of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
As I mentioned, I got diagnosed with ADHD. And this is, you are all experiencing my ADHD brain, because even though I have notes in front of me, I have gotten off track because my medicine wears off at like 5. So this is how I roll in the evenings. But it is important that I got diagnosed with ADHD, because I have also spent a lot of my life feeling like I didn't belong in the groups that I was in, and feeling like I couldn't understand why people didn't understand the way that I was communicating. because probably also all of my family is undiagnosed ADHD. And so we have a unique way from what I understand now of communicating that maybe many other people don't communicate in that way. But what I did find is that I found other people who had ADHD and we talked about it, and I felt like, oh, these people understand me, right? And there's this like very much a feeling of relief when you feel like somebody understands you. And then it became easy to be more vulnerable about things. And then to address how I communicate and to understand that the way that I communicate is different than a lot of other people. And my process for doing things is different than a lot of other people's process. One therapist said, Bekah, you are like a tank and you just keep going no matter what to make sure things get done, but you don't realize the bodies that you're leaving behind and someone has to clean those up. Like, oh, it's probably a little bit accurate, but I am working on very hard being aware of how sometimes the way that I say things or the way that I do things can hurt other people. And so really focusing on finding that way of listening and growing together with other people. And that's why I'm usually very open about these types of things, because I want to learn and I want to grow and I want to do better. And a lot of that also involves like apologizing. Sometimes you do things and you don't realize it. And I don't know. I know that there's, controversy about whether or not you should apologize, but for me, I'm an apologetic person, I think, because I just want to make sure that the people around me are taken care of and they know that I care about them, and maybe the things I said were not the best way of saying it, or I could have approached it a different way, or hey, I just did that thing because I needed to see it crossed off on my list, and I shouldn't have jumped in front of somebody else to do that. But I think that also understanding how we communicate is so important. And that allows us to grow, because it also helps me to listen better to the people around me and to see that, okay, my way might not be the best way here, or let's check in on this because I feel like you're saying yes, but maybe that's not what you mean. So I think that, that's very much also informed this community and where it has gone and where it has grown. And I don't get there unless somebody else talked about their ADHD first, unless somebody else told me about their trauma first, unless somebody else told me about that problem that they had with their code that one time they broke that one thing, right? And so I think like being open about things that other people might see as shortcomings or failures, but very much embracing those things as a learning experience. We grow through these things. We learn and we do better, or we do differently the next time. And that's been kind of my theme, I think, going forward in this year. I had this, so virtual coffee, has turned into something that I never expected it to be. I call myself an accidental founder, because if you would have asked me last year at this time if I would be doing this, there's no way. No, this doesn't even come on my radar. At the same time, it's really hard too, because there are trade-offs, right? I'm a early career developer, and I'm putting a lot of time into virtual coffee and making sure that everybody is taken care of. So, what used to be my work hours or let's learn a new tool hours have become, let's plan a new monthly challenge. Let's organize this event. Let's mentor these people. And it's been really great, but sometimes I get frustrated with myself and I think like, I should be growing faster, right? I should be Kent C. Dodds by now, right? He's got 4 kids. I can do it too. But the fact is sometimes you don't realize what you are learning and how you are growing. Communication skills are so important. If you are not a great communicator, it's definitely something to work on, because your code will get you so far, but your communication skills will get you further. Being able to talk to people, being able to work with other people, to get people excited about things, to get people passionate. I think I had a tweet the other day that said something like, if you want to build community, step one, care about the people. And I was like, that's it. That's the tweet, right? Because that is it. That's what the most important thing is, caring about those people around you. And, I realized that, I'm growing in different ways. I am definitely growing as a developer, not at the pace that I thought I would be growing, but, what am I doing? I'm developing other skills. We're doing events all the time. We're gearing up for our second round of lightning talks. We are running monthly challenges. I am a podcaster now. That's been my dream for like 3 years. And that only happened because somebody said, let's do it, right? Like, I think it was Dan. He's like, yeah, we could do that. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I just needed that community to be there with me. I'm very much a person that likes and thrives in those situations, even as an introvert. We have a newsletter. I learned how to create a newsletter. Also a skill I never thought I would need to know. I created my website that you mentioned earlier, Andrew, the Beauty and the Scar, which is talking about my trauma, which was a goal of mine for a while, and also very, very difficult for me to do, because when you're sharing this experience, as you saw, as I wept earlier in this call, it can be hard to talk about these things. But also what I've learned through this vulnerability is that there are people out there that support you, whether or not you know that they'll support you. And it's also given me more of a confidence to ask questions, and to ask questions to people that, maybe I wouldn't normally ask. So, as I was going through this process for virtual coffee, and still today, like I doubt myself every single day. And, I reach out, I've met with founders of other tech organizations. I've met with owners of tech companies. I've met with owners of nonprofits, and all because I just sent them a DM and said, hey, I'm doing this thing. I'm out of my league here. Can I ask you some questions? Right. And so, one of them met with me recently for a while, and it was a great conversation, because I feel like I'm getting a master's class in business or organization or something that, I'm an English major, right? Like, that I don't have the experience in. And I told him, I said, I was giving a recommendation for a virtual coffee member, which turned into like this very intense 30-minute interview with this company where they were asking me all of these questions, and I was super nervous. And then the guy asked me, he said, you have all of these members at virtual coffee. How do you manage them all? And I said, I mean, is winging it a style? Like, I don't know. So I was relaying this to this business owner that I talked to, and he said, you're not managing people, Bekah, you're leading, right? And that had never hit me before, that there are these different skills that you learn. And he said, you aren't going to grow as a developer in the way that maybe you had anticipated that you were. And you might not ever be a specialist, but you'll be a generalist. You know a lot of things, and you know how to talk to people. And, what is most important for me is, we're going to circle back to this idea of none of this happens if I don't go through trauma, because I am not the same person. And I am, very happy to be able to have had a community that supported me in a way that allowed me to get to this point. A community that allowed me to grow, that allowed me to be vulnerable, that allowed me to fail multiple times, that picked me up when I was hurting. And, it goes back to that idea of never wanting anybody to feel the same way that I did in that room. And this idea of helping people doesn't have to be your job. It can be part of something else. And realizing that, you know, I can do these things because I want to, because I'm passionate about them, because I work a flexible schedule, because I'm able to give up some of my working hours, you know, a lot of my working hours to do this thing. But, you know, the thing is, like, we want to change the landscape of tech. We want to make it inclusive of everyone. And so, you know, I need to do that. There's not an option for me not to do that. It has to be something that I work towards because I have the ability to do that. And so that is how I got to this point. And that is my long story of that started with the birth of my fourth child, and she is now 4 years old. So this is my 4-year journey, and I want to thank you all for sticking with me for this long.
Amazing. Yeah, there's so many messages in the chat about people's appreciation for virtual coffee and for you, and just how inspiring your story is. So thank you so much for sharing it all with us.
Thank you. I don't know if you want me to answer questions or if anyone wants to ask questions, but I am up for it if you are.
Yeah. If definitely, if well, there's a question right here. Will there be more PST time zone friendly virtual coffees?
You know, we are working very hard to figure that out. And I know, you know, the funny thing is I started doing them at, I think, 10 a.m. Eastern time, and I started doing them at noon as well because somebody from the Pacific time zone said, like, hey, can you do it a little bit later? And like, well, okay. So it is definitely on my radar, trying to figure out the best way to do that, because it's going to, you know, like I said, we're all friends at Virtual Coffee, and we want to maintain that like very intimate community. So there are definitely some big ideas for how to do that this year.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, we've had a little, that's been kind of a thing for Collab Lab too. It's like we get people asking us, you know, in South Asia or Australia if they can participate, and we just don't have the coverage at the moment to do that, you know. So we're trying to work up to it, but I'm trying to figure out this year some strategies to maybe let people kind of run these things on their own even.
Yeah.
So
right. And, you know, with all the, I feel you, because it's all volunteers, right? You know, we're all volunteering or, you know, paying money out of our own pockets for the tools and stuff that we're using. And I would love to be able to have everyone be a part of Virtual Coffee, but we have to do it in a way that like recognizes how special the community is, and to be able to maintain that across different coffee times.
Yeah, exactly. Any other questions for Bekah? Anybody want to say anything?
All right,
I know,
well.
yeah, I so appreciate your time. So appreciate just everything you've been through, and just, it's so, I mean, you know, if that trauma hadn't happened to you, you'd probably still be teaching English and you'd be perfectly happy, right? But
I'd be medium happy, I think.
Medium happy, okay. So even though you went through this terrible experience, like, you know, you've turned that into something positive for yourself, but then for so many other people too. And that's just, it's just amazing. It's so inspiring. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And I think it only happens because I have a supportive group around me. You know, not everybody is that fortunate to have what I had. And I do say it was definitely the worst moment of my life, but it has directly led to the best moments of my life. And yeah, so I am simultaneously sad about it and grateful that it's happened, which is something to work through.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, everybody. I will just put in a little plug for 2 weeks from today. We're going to have Molly Holschlag as our Tech Talk speaker. And Molly is a pillar of the web. I mean, she was really instrumental in the whole web standards movement back when the browser wars, like these things that happened in the, didn't seem like it's that long ago to me, but I look at the calendar, I realize it was a while ago that these things happened. But she's going to be here to talk about, you know, just kind of that. Like she has a real perspective on tech and where the state of the web and where it's going and things. So hope you'll consider kind of joining us for that next one. But thank you so much, Bekah. Thank you everybody for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.